Well, hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jessica Leichtweisz, and I'm a BCBA who's passionate about helping you pass your BCBA exam. So many of you have watched my content, taken your exam, and absolutely crushed it. Then you come to me and you ask me a question. Can I be your BCBA mentor for your first year in supervision? Well, I actually can't because I've not been a BCBA for 5 years. But I do want to continue to provide you resources to make sure that when you do become a BCBA, that you do a really effective job being a BCBA. So let's just face it, there's no possible way that the task list can cover everything we need to know to be really effective BCBAs, never mind really effective BCBA supervisors. So I have the privilege and honor to bring Ellie Kazemi today, Dr. Ellie Kazemi. She is amazing. She's one of my favorite people in the ABA world. I just heard her speak at the AZ ABA conference and just instantly connected to her message and everything she had to say. I'm going to formally introduce her and read her bio, and then I'll bring her on. Spoiler alert, she has an amazing book I'm going to tell you to buy when this is over. And she's going to talk today to you about how to be a really good BCBA supervisor. So Dr. Kazemi is a mentor, professor, scientist, author, and OBMer. So for those of you who are struggling with OBM, she's the go-to person. She founded the Masters of Science program in Applied Behavior Analysis in 2010 and collaborated with the CSUN community to provide graduate students high-quality supervision experiences. I love that because that is something I didn't get to have. I had a great supervisor, but I didn't get to have a college experience where I was taught to be a good supervisor because my coursework was too old and it wasn't part of the curriculum, like many of you guys who sat under the fourth edition. So Dr. Kazemi has developed and teaches undergraduate and graduate coursework in behavior analysis. She has served as a consultant helping various organizations with leadership and supervision skills. She's also served as the Chief Science Officer at the Behavioral Health Science of Excellence. Her research interests involve identification of efficient, effective strategies for practical training, supervision, and leadership. She has also invested in leveraging technology, such as robotics, virtual or augmented reality, for efficient training and feedback using simulations. She is currently working on several nationwide projects with a focus on effective training and behavioral outcomes. She received several mentorship awards, including the ABAI Best Mentor Award, so you are in tune for a great video, the Outstanding Faculty Award, the Outstanding Teaching Award, and the Outstanding Service Award. That is an incredible amount of achievements. She has published articles and book chapters on a variety of topics, including training, staff turnover, and the use of technology and behavior analysis. She is the leading author on one of the first books on supervision for behavior analysts, Supervision, a Practicum in Behavior Analysis, a handbook for supervisees, which I have right here. I'm going to tell you right now, you need to make sure if you are supervising someone, they have this book because that's going to hold you accountable to make sure you do a really good job. So with no further ado, Dr. Kazemi, it's amazing. It's a privilege and honor to have you on my channel. I really have like a little bit of star crush going on at the moment.
It is so wonderful to be here, and the feelings are absolutely mutual. I have absolutely enjoyed learning from you. Today, we've had some great conversations, but also I really love your fresh perspective. So I'm not surprised that you have so many individuals reaching out and asking you to mentor because they've identified the things that they need to continue to learn. And that makes perfect sense. So good for them. Bravo for reaching out.
Yes, I appreciate that. So I'm gonna admit, like the task list, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I love our science, right? And I've always loved our science. It's why I was able to go from just being a BCBA, or excuse me, being practicing in the field of ABA and not being a BCBA to just taking this task, developing an exam prep company. It's because I love our science, I love our task list. And when it comes though to managing people and actually taking all of the science and putting it into action, and you're not talking about kids anymore, you're talking about full-grown adult humans, I think some people can get really lost. And so supervision can be really, really difficult. Now, even though it is the same science of behavior, sometimes we don't know how to apply it when we're working with our peers or working with people that we're supervising. So can you talk a little bit about how it is that we can take this amazing science we have that we all love so much, or we would not have spent so many hours studying for this exam and passing it and working with our kiddos and applying that to working with fully grown adult humans that are, like I said, our peers in our office.
I think it's interesting as you outlined things. I realized behavior analysis has taught us that behavior is absolutely about its context. And, what I love most about our profession is that we would never make the error of saying someone is a natural leader or that they're born a leader, but recognize that there were contextual things in their history, life events that really set them for that position, and that we could in fact teach and bring people to those types of leadership positions. To me, that is beautiful to recognize because it's giving us some capacity to say, I can do something for individuals, right? Which is why we're so successful with some of the toughest clients historically for other clinical professions that may have been trying as well. And I think that in behavior analysis, we made the classic error. So we forgot, I think, something that's fundamental to our own science, which is, doing something and doing it well. So if I'm an excellent clinician, does not mean I'm going to make an excellent supervisor. And we know this. We already know this as behavior analysts, that these are two different behavior repertoires, and that one requires, actual feedback and training, and the other, but it took us some time to catch on. And I think that that's what you're really seeing is that, first, I don't think the BACB can have task lists that cover everything we need to have in our repertoire. I do think that our health profession and our supervisors, who are every day across so many different groups of individuals, need so many different skills with regards to conflict management, to bring people, hold people, nurture people, and yet keep people, working hard. And all of those skills would be very difficult to put in a task list. And I think, BACB has moved toward this rightfully, which is to say, these are some things you need to know for the exam so that you can pass an exam. And I think that many of us are moving toward, let's talk about all of the competencies, the true nature of supervision, which requires so many different skills. And yeah, you have to learn those, because you can be excellent as a supervisor and as a clinical supervisor, but that doesn't mean that you can teach other people, train other people, motivate other people, encourage them, hold them, bring them to those criteria. So
Yeah, I love that. And, I've often found that the best clinical supervisors for working on cases with clients are actually the worst supervisors because they're so, there's they take for granted that certain things come easy to them, right? And that they know certain things. And so there's this underlying assumption that other people know what they know, or because they've had maybe such amazing experience. Like I was privileged to have one of the best training experiences possible. I was mentored at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and I will give them a shout out because I'm so grateful to them. I worked for them for the first 8 years of my career, and the training I got there was absolutely incredible. So now I am in the process of working on opening an agency. I'm partnering with another organization. So don't go to them for services. Come send me an email. But I do want to give them a shout out and give them credit where credit's due. I had exceptional training, like incredible training. I don't even think people can still get the quality of training I had, back before Rethink and Catalyst had all these libraries. You had binders, and you had to memorize the lessons, and you had to know where they were to print up the sheets. It's not like today where, you just click a bunch of buttons and people call that ABA. I mean, I just was blessed with incredible training. And I sometimes find myself, and I do consider myself a good clinician. I've been in the field for a really long time. And I find myself taking for granted that I know certain things, and that the trainees that I am working with, that they should know these things too. And it's my job to teach them those things. And so, right, those foundation skills, those precursor behaviors, they don't come in knowing them. And we take for granted. We just assume that they should. And I think it can set us up for failure as being supervisors, and even more importantly, or more tragically, set up our trainees for failure. Because number one, we're modeling bad supervision. And number two, they're not really taught those foundational skills that we just kind of assumed they've learned before coming to us. So what would you say, have you experienced that? And if you have, how can someone catch themselves doing that? And how can they change that and make sure they're making, they really are training people on the proper foundations so they can have become effective BCBAs?
I mean, I think you raise many excellent points, and there's several things in what you're saying that really matter. I think at one level, you're speaking about the fact that as mentors, when we mentor the next generation of behavior analysts, that we have to really recognize that their history may have been these videos or passive learning experiences, and that we're responsible for taking that now and making it practical for them and really providing them with the reinforcers, with the opportunities to succeed and to really feel good at doing the job and doing it right. I think the other thing you said, which I think is an interesting point, and that is that you could be an excellent clinician, and sometimes your excellent clinicians are actually not good supervisors. I think that taking a behavioral perspective of our employees, of the individuals we supervise or the team we're responsible for would be really healthy. When we walk into a client's home, we're doing initial assessments, we would never presume we know all of their reinforcers. But I think because we treat our supervisees or employees as individuals that are like us, because yet they're another adult with same potential vocal verbal repertoire, we make the error of thinking their reinforcers are the same as us. We make the errors of thinking that they are there for the same exact reasons. Their big picture ideas are similar. And that their history or their learning experience is the same. So they learn in the same ways that we have. And I think that that's honestly something that makes sense, right? So we kind of do as we learned for the individuals, because we have not really yet put into place very structured learning opportunities for supervisors to start asking those really important questions, like, how do you need to hear your feedback? What are some opportunities you've had for learning that really set you up for success? Under what conditions do you optimally perform as a human being? Because we all differ in that. What is that optimal performance for us? And I think that those are some really important conversations we need to begin to have and recognize that we're dealing with the same thing that we're dealing with our clients. We're talking about learning. Learning comes with error, and a lot of times our adult learners have gained a history where error is seen as bad or failure, and we need to really help distinguish feedback that's meant to help them move forward, and feel free to put forth behavior. I think that that's our biggest challenge with our adult learners is put your behavior out there, keep trying, keep persisting, because that's how you learn. And it's hard because that's not necessarily how school has been. School's been, here's a rubric, work toward a rubric. Clinical work does not work that way. We have some things that are clearly structured, here, have a field, put 2 things in this field, remove them in a timely manner. Some of those things we can do, but there's the reality of the many, many, many beautiful complexities that come in that clinical world, that we need to be able to have those in vivo, that relationship with our supervisees, to know what makes them feel nurtured, loved, helped, so that they grow under those conditions and do better in the future. So that was my long-winded answer to say, it's we are not very good at it, because we need to take an entire behavioral now perspective of each of our mentees in a system that sometimes is difficult. It's a cycle, right? Because we have lots of our mentees or supervisees or RBT level staff who are leaving the field for other fields. So it's hard to put so much time sometimes in individuals that may not be with you in a year. But that is also they go on to continue to learn that, and they continue to populate all the stuff you did for them. So, we need to just find ways to keep that healthy perspective, but help our field, our profession begin to look for reinforcing events and learning opportunities for our emerging behavior analysts.
Yeah, I love that. And I think as a culture, we have adopted that approach, but we haven't necessarily merged it into applied behavior analysis. So, I started this channel a long time ago. It was actually in my late 20s. So back then, I used to call, I used to say in ABA that you had your good days and you had your whiskey days. So now that I'm a mature behavior analyst, I say that I have my good days and you have your wall kicking days. Shifted my perspective a little bit. But, the reality of it is we have moments in this field that are really hard. And we have moments in this field that are really rewarding. And I think for most of us, the reinforcement exceeds those difficult moments. But I do think that it's important to know when you're supervising someone, whether they're a trainee or whether it's just someone who's on your staff. I'm a big believer in Simon Sinek's book, like Start with Why, right?
Mhm.
And know why you're doing this. I think that it's also really important that you know your trainees why and that you know your employees why. Now, obviously, we don't want to get too involved in our employees in professional life, right? Or personal life, excuse me, because we want to make sure we don't have any of those dual relationships. But I do think that it's important because when you have those moments, you can then bring them back to why they're doing this, right? And that makes sense behaviorally. Okay, we have this whole start with why, this culture and movement of knowing your personal why and your global why. But I think it really just comes down to motivating operations, right? When it comes to when we're talking about behavior science, it really just comes down to motivating operations. Knowing the reinforcers for employees, but I think also knowing their motivating operations. Like, why is that reinforcing to them? Because sometimes I have found that we can lose our reinforcers in this field. We really can, because you have those moments where you think you're putting 100% into everything, and you are working so hard for a kid, and you're creating like charts on the weekends, and you're on Canva printing up little pictures to send to your RBTs, and the child's just not making progress. Right. And that's so difficult. And you're doing everything you can to make them make progress. And maybe you're a phenomenal clinician and you have a fantastic team, but that child is limited.
Yeah.
And a parent is starting to accept that. And I can't even imagine how challenging that would be for a parent to do. And we know that oftentimes parents are looking for someone to blame, or they're looking for another solution if something's not working. Right. And so our trainees are going to experience that moment where something's put on them and they'll ask, what did I do wrong? And they really haven't done anything wrong. And I think in those moments, for me, knowing the motivating operations, not just the reinforcers, because sometimes reinforcers can be taken away, and sometimes they can be taken away by other people parents can take away a reinforcer, a child can take away a reinforcer, whether it's just someone moving or whether or not, a family is just desperate to try to help their child and they want to try something different because in their mind, what's happening is not working. You can lose those reinforcers. But if you know your trainees' motivating operations, you can help them reestablish them. So I've found that to be really valuable personally.
Yeah, I think, again, you're putting in a lot of different things into that bucket that's really important. I think that you're also identifying within that your reinforcers, client progress as a part of the potential reinforcing event, right? And so I think what you're pointing out is definitely something that we would do with anyone when we realize that we need to work on it, which is you want there to be a menu of reinforcers. If there is only singular or one or two things that are reinforcing about your position, then you are at risk for, your behavior being placed on extinction because the ratio is going to maybe thin very much. And this is also true in relationships, right? So you want to make sure that there are, just in any healthy relationship and any healthy thing, that you help the individual establish various reasons for, feeling successful at the end of the day. And honestly, I think that if we do free operant assessments of what's happening or what individuals seem to move toward, what are their approaches, we get a better sense of those classes of things that are reinforcing for them. And, I've definitely had to work with individuals in expanding that sometimes, because I do think if client progress itself is the only, one of the few things that you find super reinforcing, you can burn out if there are barriers to that progress, either because of the learning opportunities of the individuals or freaking A, the cultural, context we're in, various shifts occur within the organization. We take certain hits and we're not able to provide the right, amount of dosage in the right way, and training's backtracking. And so we can totally begin to feel frustrated and not feel like in any way what we're doing is reinforcing. And so it's important that we sort of expand our menu of reinforcers altogether to have a healthier, more long, healthy perspective of our profession as well, because we're going to face all of those times. And I think you point out something else that's really important in the work that I do. I originally did a lot of work in giving tough feedback, being in tough situations with families or tough situations with our technicians. How do you provide those crucial feedbacks that may not be easy to hear on the part of the individual hearing it? And I realized that as a culture, we have a really hard time providing those, because we empathize, we feel for the individual, and there's these things that we need to learn how to do. And what I needed to really start with is, when is it appropriate to provide even such feedback? And I have really been working a lot more on, how do you develop the right type of relationships? How do you begin to show that you care beyond the actual task itself when someone's working with you? And so sometimes I get people coming up to me after talks, or even in some of the work that I do, and people will say to me, well, I'm feeling a little challenged by what you're proposing, because how am I supposed to not get into a dual relationship? So I think, you bring up a really excellent point, and that is that we need to also take a healthy perspective about our code of ethics and what the function of the codes are as well. Because I would say some of my best interactions and some of my deepest relationships are very much with individuals that I continue to supervise or mentor. That does not mean I don't know who their, what their struggles are. It doesn't mean I don't know who they are as sisters, brothers, parents, partners. Doesn't mean I don't know when they have really horrible fights at home, or their love or passion for their animals, or even some of the quirky interests that they have. I know all of those, and they in turn know more about me. That does not mean we have a dual relationship. And I think it's really important that we begin to look at that functionally. I have to make sure that any relationship I form with any of the individuals that I am guiding or providing any support to is not such that the individual can get harmed in the relationship as a result of that, such that they somehow see, or other individuals in that group feel disadvantaged or somehow put at a different place because of those relationships. That, I think, is absolutely true. And it becomes murkier. It's harder. It's easy to be black and white and say, I don't form relationships with my supervisees. We don't have lunch together. We don't have, any times with each other. But I absolutely think it's going to kill our profession if we take that perspective, ethically speaking. Teachers become strong teachers because they have time together. Personnel becomes strong personnel together because they go outside of those strategic discussions, and they go outside of those board meetings. And at the end of the day, people vote based on relationships, not based on those discussions. And so I think it's really important for us to also find that balance better too together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did dig into a little bit of your work prior to having you come on. And I saw like one of your a video where you said, people have to like you first. Essentially, I'm summarizing or paraphrasing, but people have to like you first. And I do think that feedback, if someone trusts you and likes, if someone, like, people want to do business with people they know, like, and trust, right? Well, it's no different in our context. People don't want to buy a product from someone they don't know, like, and trust. And essentially, and it may simplify the exchange, and it is a very complex relationship. But the reality of it is that someone still wants to know, like, and trust you, and to know that you have their best interests in mind. And then if you have to give them feedback that's difficult to hear, if they like you, if they trust you, and they know that you have their best interests in mind, it is going to be a lot easier for them to receive that.
You're 100% right. Absolutely. It's going to make it very difficult to walk in and say to someone, I think some of the interaction you had with that family today is going to make it more difficult over time with you to provide them with, continued encouragement. But I do think that some of the things you said to that parent today may result in expectations that we cannot meet. And that is tough feedback, right? Because now you're hearing the efforts you put, the things you just did not work in the way that you intended to. It's another thing to say, here are some things we can do together to make that better. But all of that would not function well if the person doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of care and that you know them and you will hold and take them through that. And that, I think, is become really my mission for supervisors, is how do we do that in under situations where we're constantly running to fires, where our cognitive and well-being is all of our energies is being taken by the number of things that come our way in our profession, right? Because we're just, in many ways, we're the firefighters of the field, right? Because we're the teacher needs something, mom needs something, kid did this, and our behavior technicians did this. And we have young professionals joining us, sitting for their BCBA, and they're like, wait a minute, I thought I get to sit down and think and really think about my assessments and think about my interventions and test out my intervention. And it's like, no, I'm just running to fire all the time. And you're the problem solvers of the field. When you are just entering, problem solving is hard because you don't have other examples of it. You're just beginning to gain the examples. You need multiple exemplars of the same problem to be able to problem solve, right? So, I feel for them, because I'm like, hey, between all of that, also pause, take a deep breath, and get to know your supervisees. Take the time. So I do feel like a lot of it is also contextually, we are in positions where it's easier to be efficient and task oriented, and it doesn't serve us well in the long run. But since the more immediate contingencies control our behavior, it makes sense that we don't take the time, and we need to.
Yeah, I love that. And love how you talk about like that fear of entering into a relationship. And I remember I was at a meeting and I had asked, one of the RBTs I was talking to and said, hey, do you want to just grab lunch together? Because we and continue this conversation. And it was on a lunch break at a conference. She's like, are we allowed to do that? Or is that a dual relationship? And I said, well, no, as BCBAs, you don't have, it's not like you have to sit and face the wall. I'm like, you're a person too. You can talk to each other. And I do think like there's, we, as a field, we have this risk of making very black and white rules. And I do think that a lot of BCBAs are very black and white. And obviously the ethics codes are in place for a reason. And I do think, you do need to look at the spirit or the function, right, of why they were put into place, but also understand that we're still human. And humans have a need to have interactions with other humans. And if, you are supervising someone and it does seem like a transaction all the time, and it does seem like a task all the time, rather than a human interaction, it does make those harder conversations much more difficult because
That's very well said. Yeah.
Thank you. So we talked a lot about all of this kind of like philosophy and this almost these spiritual aspects of being a good human and being a good supervisor and connecting our values in terms of the practicality, because I think a lot of people just genuinely have no idea where to start. Well, I'm going to say one of the best places to start is by picking up your book and reading this, because this is so much practical information on how to actually be a good supervisor. But in terms of like creating the curriculum, knowing, are you the right person for this potential trainee? What are some kind of practical tips you can give someone who's just getting started?
I think that I honestly think that our profession is at a place where the first place many of us are, and I still feel this way. So I think it's not just when we enter the profession, is to accept that a part of what we're going to do is just these self-reflections. So program for self-reflective times where you revisit your own imposter syndrome and ask yourself, what are some of these things that I need to continue to learn? And I think the difficulty with imposter syndrome is that there is a portion of it where you feel like people have expectations of you that they might not even have, right? You have these ideas about what it means to be You know, I have these ideas about what it means to be on this podcast, being called upon by you with regards to, you know, what do we do in supervision? And then there's a mismatch, honestly, between my expectations of what I think you need from me versus potentially what can be helpful and hopefully a contribution as you put this out and work with your community. And I think, you know, first thing is to take some time to become comfortable with the fact that that imposter syndrome will be our friend and move along life with us. There is no ever becoming perfect. That notion is not true, and that all we can do is take one step forward every day. And I think that that's the, you know, the thing that I just try to do is get a little bit better every day. And I first would say you kind of take a look back and go, oh my God, I'm sorry. Like, to all the individuals that you may have known better for, you may have done a little bit better with, but your job's to just keep trying. You're doing your best under the conditions and the context and the things that you're doing. So if you can just keep moving forward just a little bit every day, I'd say you are in an amazing place. And that's the main goal I would have for myself, for anyone I care about, and I think that's one place I would start. And honestly, I think the other place is to take self-reflections that help me move forward with regards to the things that I want to tackle. I really love the literature on self-biases, or taking a look at the potential biases you may have, because it helps you sort of identify, take, you know, these self-assessments and say to yourself, you know, what are some things I could be doing better? And I think one of the things I would encourage every supervisor to do is to share that publicly with the people they work with. You know, hey, you know, I'm looking at some self-reflection books. I'm looking at these things. I'm trying to learn this thing, because what I've found it does is it helps me have a village, a community where my mentees or my mentors, they teach me, they go, oh, you know, they get excited that I'm trying to learn something new, which they know ultimately is to help me become a stronger mentor for them. And they're happy to share and talk with me about, you know, what their needs are. And I think that those two practical tips, be open to self-reflect and continue to learn, put one foot, you know, in front of the other every day, are the places I would say I still stand by. I start there and stay there.
Yeah, I love that. I know why this, to me, this is exactly why we're on the same wavelength here, because I know I definitely suffer from imposter syndrome. And I'm a big believer that if you ever get comfortable, it means you're stopped growing. So if you are listening to this and you don't have imposter syndrome, I'm going to just tell you that you're not playing a big enough game, and nobody wins when you're playing small. So you need to step it up if you feel like you have got this, because none of us do. You know, Dr. Ellie obviously has done amazing things in the field. You know, if you guys are watching my content and often say, you know, how do you do this? And honestly, guys, I get nervous every time. Every time I make a video, I'm worried about my background and my hair is not looking the way I want it to look. And what if Snapchat goes off and you see how old I really look behind the lens? Right? There's like all these things that go running through our head. But I mean, the commitment to growth, I love that. You know, I think being vulnerable with the people that you're training. Those of you who tutor with me and come to my study groups know that I study every day. You know, I have not stopped studying for my BCBA exam when I pass my exam, because I'm tutoring you guys on how to pass your exam. And there's so many more things to cover, right? I know. And then as soon as let's say I happen to have mastered the entire Cooper book and the, you know, entire lasting behavior change book, the next edition's coming out in just 2 years. So there will be more to know, right? Our field is always changing. And I definitely have my moments where I look back and I would never do the same thing I did 15 years ago with the clients I was working with. Never. And I'm sure, you know, Dr. Kazemi, you can say the same thing, but we did do the best we can with the information we had at a time. And I think it's a good thing that we have that philosophical doubt in our field, right? That we're always looking to be better and we're always looking to improve, you know, whether it's personally or professionally. So I just think that's amazing. You know, this is, you know, and the time we're recording this is right before Christmas. So I don't know if I'll get this out right before the new year or right after the new year, but either way, it's a fantastic time of year to really look at self-reflection. You know, I was talking to Dr. Kazemi, before this, I write out 10,000 goals every year. So these are my goals. I was working on that all morning. So I would encourage you guys to really stretch yourself and to really, like you said, reflect and make sure that, you do look at yourself, when it comes to simply, if you guys are taking my, BCBA exam courses, one of the questions I have on one of my mock exams is, what do you do if like all of your RBTs are not effective in one area, right? And the answer is to look at your supervision practices. Yeah. So I think that's fantastic advice. And I'm so grateful for you being on here. I do love this book, guys. I don't always endorse books on my shows, but I think this is a really, really practical book. It just makes so much sense, and it does follow the 5th edition task list. So for me, if you're studying for the exam, I think this is a really helpful way to be able to kind of understand what really is required of us to be good supervisors. So I would highly recommend you guys get this book. I will put a link to it in the show notes below.
I appreciate it. I do have to tell you something, Jessica. I did not mention that book was, I think, the first book in supervision. And we purposefully targeted the supervisees. We had placed everything on our website for all supervisors to have access to, but someone actually pressed print and was selling it. So to deal with that as abuse, we went to Springer, which is a very large publishing company. And so as Springer began to publish the book, we went ahead and just to let everyone know that that's where they can get the source. We are working on the 2nd edition now, and that's mostly because we've received some incredible feedback from many universities that are using the book. But one thing we realized is we wrote it to the supervisee to empower the supervisee. This is your experience. You pursue, you push your supervisor. But it's actually written for supervisors to be able to help that. But we realized the title can kind of make people think it's for the supervisee. So I just want you to know the next edition that's coming out, it's due for us in June, which means usually takes a year to send that out and put it out there. So maybe in the next year and a half, 2 years, you should see a new edition that actually has entire sections that directly speak to the supervisor. And that's our goal, is to also kind of move toward exactly what the community needs. One of the things that I've realized with the supervision experience is, you speak of the task list. We talked to employers and said, what are some of the main competencies you need to see? And we've developed a set of competencies for people to work toward as supervisors, and those shift as our field shifts. So we're excited to add some things to some of those competencies.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. I actually did not know that. I did think it was for supervisees, but I found it really helpful as a supervisor. What I think sets this book apart from some of the other fantastic supervision books I've read. And as you guys know, I did have the Supervisor Handbook, the authors of that book, and I also love that book as well. What I like about this book, though, it's the first book that I felt put me in the shoes of a supervisee, and I was looking at myself from their perspective, and it really gave me insight that a checklist doesn't have. A checklist of competencies is great, right? And we're used to that. We're used to being able to like check off, we got this skill, but evaluating our approach is a little bit different. And when we can put ourselves in the perspective of the person we're working with and evaluate our approach rather than simply just assessing our skills, I think it makes us much more effective supervisors. So that's what I got out of the book. So if that's what you were trying to put into it, well done.
Exactly. It's exactly right. I love it. I love what an avid reader you are. I love how you take a big picture perspective. So it's very, very nice to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being on. It is absolutely an honor to have you on as a guest. And I know we are going to do another show. We'll just give a little spoiler alert about selecting interventions. And, guys, sometimes our parents, they say one thing, they mean something else, and we need to figure that out. And Dr. Kazemi is really good at teaching us how to figure that out. So we're going to have another show in the future on that topic. But thank you so much for today. It was absolutely a privilege to have this conversation.
The privilege was mine. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
Okay. I don't know. There we go.